oh, and by the way, New Yorkers are a unique group. Am I in the right space? And so trying to find a way of how's our context, how's it unique? And then, almost finally, we wanted to seek our own self-understanding, to kind of understand what were we getting out of being helpful to you. You know, there's an adage that says if you're a therapist, if you're a minister, if you're a nurse, that there's some kind of healing you're trying to do within yourself as you're helping others. And so to be honest to that, to say, in helping you, here's how it helps me as well. And then finally, we felt at the end of the day, the most important thing that we could offer to you is show that we care. And I don't know about you, but I've been in situations where disaster found my address, there were things that were traumatic. At the end of the day, I felt the most amount of healing when someone could show that he or she cares. And so that was kind of what we did. And at the end of the day, I thought that as a psychoanalyst, you abandon the script. Throw the script out and just be human. And to relate to one another, one human being to another. Your story matters, you matter, and what we're experiencing together is a sacred moment. Is a sacred moment. And let's honor the moment, let's honor that time together, and let's see how we together move on. I'm a Baptist minister. I could go on and on, but I'm going to be obedient to my time frame. It's a miracle, I want you to know, but I'm going to stop.
So just to talk a little bit about the transitions that have taken place since 9/11 and where we are today when it comes to emotional and spiritual care as an intervention. At the time of 9/11, there were very few communities around the United States that really had built local networks of religious leaders that were working collaboratively with mental health and emergency management. That has really transformed multiple times over, frankly, in the past 15 years. And all of the national relief agencies that respond to disasters now in the United States also have spent a good bit of the last 10 years or so developing points of consensus around emotional and spiritual care, as well as guidelines to help communities around the United States look at how disasters are not only responded to within the early days of the relief effort, but literally all the way up through the anniversaries, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and the implications that come along with those anniversary dates. Now, disasters create communities. Just as the families are a community, the first responders remain in community, the caregivers remain in community, we all experience disasters from different perspectives. But we're all trying to look at the recovery effort as a whole. And I think one of the unique attributes that emotional and spiritual care has brought to this conversation is when the government stands up responses to crises around the United States, do we look at the individual as a whole person, if you will, and also as the community, or members of a community? And I think we have to recognize that often in the past we've fallen short in that area. So we look at how caregivers might have momentary interactions with those that are impacted by crisis, but we also look now at the fact that we have a long-term relationship with that recovery effort as well. The relationships I've formed over the past 15 years have transformed my own ministry in unique ways. I don't think I could have ever seen myself here 15 years ago on September 10th. 15 years later, along with Storm and Will, there's actually a very small group of religious leaders and caregivers that came out of the 9/11 experience, not only of those early days, but of the years subsequently, and we've become these subject matter experts. The government calls them SMEs, right? So a subject matter expert is sort of an odd title for somebody who, like me, just thinks this is kind of how my ministry turned out after 15 years. I don't really consider myself an expert in much, but I know I have a lot of experience and perspective to share. And I think that the work that we've done in relationship with you as the families and the first response community has changed the way our work is done nationally, and I think that's a great gift that has been brought to that national conversation. That intervention for us is really about making sure that there are as few additional losses as possible for someone who lives through a disaster. The challenge with a disaster is it creates opportunities for ongoing loss. And if we aren't resilient, if the interventions aren't appropriate, if they're not effective, and if they're not trustworthy, those that are impacted can continue to experience losses that really prevent healing from ever taking place, or taking place briefly until someone rips a superficial scab off again. What in many of these charts get called trigger events. So we've learned since 9/11 that flashing images of planes crashing into towers on television screens dramatically affects the wellness, particularly of the young, because they don't see it as a one-time event being replayed. They see it as the same event over and over again. We also recognize that although there are many needs after disasters, physical needs, material needs, when you give a traumatized individual a significant amount of money, they often don't spend the money effectively. And then they go through the loss of those resources and the guilt that goes along with the loss of those resources. So, for instance, I've spent a lot of time over the past few months talking with leaders in Orlando about what kind of support families who get Victims Compensation Fund payouts should receive, what kind of education, what kind of mental health and spiritual support they need, so that they make good decisions about what to do with significant resources that they get early in the recovery effort. We also talk about the need for gap services. Most of the programs the government stands up after disasters are not wraparound services. You get assistance with housing, you get assistance with mental health services, you might get assistance with case management, but very few of those systems interconnect with mental health services. They don't necessarily include case management, they don't necessarily include spiritual care. But in the United States, where you're talking about a population where 83% of our population considers themselves religiously observant, right? If 83% of our population is religious, are 83% of our caregivers aware of what it means to support someone who is a religious individual? What does it mean to treat someone as a whole, the spiritual being, the emotional being, the physical being that an individual is? And do we bring the right group of interventions together, if you will, to support someone as the whole of who they are, not just one thing, one medical thing, one mental health thing, one spiritual thing, one financial thing. I think that the experience of 9/11 and subsequently Katrina really changed that dramatically. And what is available today is more effective. But as I was talking with some of my colleagues about earlier here today, because now we're talking about the recovery efforts in Louisiana and Orlando at the same time, there's still gaps. So how do we, as a community, the 9/11 community, whether we're victims' family members, whether we're survivors, whether we're caregivers, in our role as advocates, in that authentic voice of experience, how can we influence policy around how these interventions are applied? And can we lend a voice to the importance of treating the individual as a whole, to making sure that the interventions that are funded, if you will, by federal initiatives treat an individual as a whole, spiritual, emotional, and physical being, not just somebody who needs a check, although checks certainly matter, particularly in the early days after a crisis. Chaplaincy for us is really a ministry of presence. Often words are not even necessarily. Simply the presence of religious leaders is a way of sanctifying time and space. It's a non-judgmental, if you will, companion in the early days of the relief efforts. But it is also a starting point of a relationship. And emotional and spiritual care interventions, emotional and spiritual care support is something that must be paid attention to over a prolonged period of time. I'm sure many of you recognize in yourself, 15 years on, what that length of time means. And the reason why the 15th anniversary is often looked at as one of the hardest anniversaries is because it's the period of a generation. I interviewed people to work for me today who weren't even remotely aware of the events of 9/11, and yet they want to work in New York Disaster Interface Services. They want to work for me. I know that's going to become more and more challenging over time to hire people that have any perspective on the events of 9/11. And it also adds a burden to us to not only advocate for those who will be affected by disasters in the future, but to advocate, to educate young people today about what 9/11 meant to us, what we have lived through, the life experiences we have, to make sure that they understand and never forget, and other mantras, if you will, like that, have profound meaning to the Pearl Harbor generation, those who lived through the Holocaust, those who lived through the Civil Rights Movement, and those who lived through 9/11. Part of the healing path for all of us is to make sure people today, young people today, are educated about the impact of something as catastrophic to our nation and to you and to the caregiver community as 9/11. We have to give people a lens through which they understand the healing and the hope and the recovery efforts that go along with 9/11. The other challenge for us, of course, is the first responder community. We simply don't know the long-term health effects of 9/11 yet. We know that it has killed many people already. We know that there are thousands that are sick. We know that there are tens of thousands that could potentially get sicker. And what does it mean for us in terms of how we plan interventions in future disasters? It made 9/11 and the learnings of 9/11 and the health impacts of 9/11 mean that we look at additional disasters that happen in the United States differently. We don't just think about them in terms of case management impact or housing rebuild or financial assistance. From day one now, we begin to look at the potential impact on the caregivers, on the first responders long term, as well as the survivors and victims' family members. So you coming together, I think, is very hopeful to me. I think the fact that the 9/11 community, through the Fetchets and other leaders in the community, forming a community that continues to check in on itself, continues to care for itself, offers opportunities for those of us in professional caregiving to transform the way this work continues to be done. So I know it's hard and painful to come together, but I also want to celebrate what that means for you as a community, the education that it brings to those of us that have stayed in this recovery work over a long time. And I want to assure you that what you share with us, what expertise Mary brings back to conferences every year, these are the things that continue to help other communities live through crisis, to be more resilient, to build a more resilient nation. And your partnership in these kinds of events is critical to continue that, and I encourage you to continue to be a part of it. So God bless you on your journey.
Deputy Special Master, the Administrator of the New York Office of Victims Compensation Fund, Jordy Feldman, Matthew, and then our attorneys, Matthew McCauley and Noah Krishlevsky, and Ben Shabbat, all who worked tirelessly and have an incredible wealth of knowledge about the Droga Act. And as many of you heard throughout the day, it was reauthorized this past December, and there have been a lot of changes. And so this is really getting it from the people that are administering it. If you have questions, they are themselves going to introduce a little bit about what's going on, and then we're going to open the floor to questions. So, no further ado, take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Rupa Pavacharia. I'm the new special master for the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund. Is that better? Yes. Okay, good. So let me start again. I'm Rupa Pavacharia. I'm the new special master for the September 11th Victims Compensation Fund. I was appointed by the Attorney General on July 21st of this year, so I'm just 6 weeks in, but I've been doing some consulting with the fund since January, since the reauthorization. I come from a background where I run 2 other compensation funds for the Department of Justice before taking on this one. And I'm very, very proud to be here, and thank you to the people who have put this event together. I wanted to start just by telling you a few things about how the new statute affects the fund. As you all know, President Obama signed the Reauthorize the Droga Act in December of 2015. It does 3 very important things for purposes of the fund. The first is that it extends the fund for another 5 years. Claims can now be filed for compensation with the fund until December of 2020. The second thing is that it increases the total amount of funding available for the fund, whereas before we were limited to $2.775 billion. We now have what's left of that money plus another $4.6 billion to be able to give out to people who are suffering. The third piece is that for the first time since the fund was created in 2011, it actually directs the fund to provide full payment to claimants coming in up front. Until the reauthorization, claimants were only receiving 10% of the award amounts because no one was sure what amount the money would last. But now we have been directed and we are able to provide all claimants the entirety of their award amounts up front when we make the award. And so we've been in the process of going back to those people who got the 10% and filling out those awards. And going forward, claimants will get full value for their awards at the time that the award is issued. The statute did make a couple of other changes to the operation of the fund. One of which is that it put some caps on the kinds of awards that are given. It capped gross annual income for purposes of calculating economic loss awards at $200,000 a year, and it puts some limits on non-economic loss, the pain and suffering awards, depending on whether or not the condition at issue is a cancer condition or a non-cancer condition. One of the things that the fund does that we're trying to implement is that it does require us to prioritize claims for those with the most debilitating conditions. So we are trying to make sure that more money goes to those who are suffering most severely in an effort to try to bring some relief. You know, one of the things I've learned in the last 6 months is that I know that there is absolutely no amount of money that can compensate for the losses that were suffered on that day. But I am very, very proud to be part of an effort that is at least trying to do a little bit. I'm going to let Stephanie Langston, who is our Deputy Special Master, talk a little bit about where we are.
Hi, good afternoon.
I wanted to point out that up front, we have some handouts that we've brought with us. So at the end, I encourage you to go ahead and take one. We have some general facts about the reauthorization, some general information about the fund. There's one document that talks about registration. And so please feel free to take those on your way out. I also will mention, if you haven't been to our website recently, I would encourage you to go to our website. We have a lot of information on it, including an update on how to file a claim with our new claim form. We've streamlined it as a result of the reauthorization, and we think that it's a form that is much easier to complete. And the website also has, particularly on the forms and resources page, a lot of information and resources to help you file your claim. So as Rupa mentioned, we have some recent statistics. We did post a report yesterday. Was yesterday Friday? Yes, yesterday. And in that report, we announced that we have issued 10,580 awards, and 9,130 of those were for the Group A claims, and 1,450 were for the Group B claims. And I think most people know, as a result of the reauthorization, we had the two groups of claims. So overall, for all of those, we've issued awards totaling over $2 billion. We still have a good amount of work ahead of us. We have 20,978 decided eligibility forms. Now, not all of those individuals have been found eligible, and not all of those have submitted their compensation forms. So one thing that we are encouraging everyone to do, if you haven't already, is to complete and submit your claims as soon as you're able to do so. So we have 20,978 decided eligibility claims, which is about 90% of the total that we've received. And during the period following the reauthorization, because the eligibility criteria didn't change, we were able to continue to issue those eligibility decisions. In terms of the Group B claims, we have about just over 2,500 that have the information we need that's been submitted in order to start our review. And of those, over 50% have been reviewed and decided since January. So we are working to make progress on those.
Hi, I'm Jordy Feldman. I'm the director of the New York office of the VCF. I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about the relationship that the VCF has with the World Trade Center Health Program. I know for those of you who are here this morning, you've heard Dr. Luft and Dr. Moline and Dr. Rosen speak. And there is, we do have a very close working relationship with them, both in terms of to the extent that the World Trade Center program has among the list of covered conditions or adds to it, we generally rely on them for that. With one notable exception that Dr. Love pointed out earlier this morning, which is that under our statute, the VCF does not compensate for, it only compensates for mental harm. For physical harm. It does not compensate for mental harm. So while there are other areas where the special master has discretion, that is not one of them. But generally speaking, if the World Trade Center Health Program certifies a condition, we will rely on that in terms of the eligibility for the condition. But for our program, you will still need to satisfy the other elements of eligibility in order to be eligible for compensation. And one thing that's very important to note, and I know there is confusion out there, is that just because you are registered for the World Trade Center Health Program does not mean that you are automatically registered for our program. They are two separate programs. There's a lot of, we have a lot of interactions with them, and we do work very closely with them, but you need to register separately for the VCF, even if you are already participating in the World Trade Center Health Program. The other thing that's important to note is that while our criteria does overlap to some extent, there are some differences, notably the mental health conditions that are not covered. There's also, for those of you who are participating in the health program already, you may know that there are certain exposure criteria that the World Trade Center Health Program looks to determine if you have sufficient exposure to relate your condition to 9/11. And that the exposure time frame is a little bit longer than the VCF's time frame in order to prove that you were present. So our program, you have to show that you were present from any time from September 11 to May 30th, 2002. Under the health program, that's extended to September 11, 2002. So it doesn't happen often, but to the extent that someone's exposure was only in that later period of time, or we also have different documentation requirements. So you may have had sufficient exposure for purposes of the World Trade Center Health Program determining that your condition is related to your exposure. But you still will then, when you submit a claim to the fund, the VCF, need to provide some documentation showing that you were present within our time frame.
And I know there were a lot of questions in this last panel, but I just wanted to make sure that when we come back from lunch, we're going to have a panel on commemoration, and then the remainder of the day is really going to be spent on having small groups with like-minded, whether it's families, survivors, responders, service providers, etc. You'll be sitting at tables with your counterparts, and it will be facilitated by some of the clinicians that are here today. So we'll have a lot of time to talk and share our stories with each other, and so I'm going to turn it over now to the John.
John Feal for president.
Yeah, so I want to give you guys an accurate 7.5 years of Mr. Stewart. And this is the most accurate story you'll ever hear, and I'll do it in about 3 to 4 minutes. In 2010, Beth Shaw called me, and that's John's assistant from The Daily Show, and she said, Mr. Feal, Mr. Stewart would like to talk to you. And I said, absolutely. He gets on the phone, he's eating a sandwich, and he's like, John Feal, you're going to come on the show tomorrow, we're going to embarrass Republicans, and we're going to get the bill passed. And I said, I'm not writing a book. I would love to come on your show, but I got to go back to D.C. tomorrow, and I can't do it. And he's like, what do you mean you can't come on my show? And I said, I got to finish what I started. So he's like that. I like that. That's a man of integrity. But check this out. Give me 4 guys who'll put him on the show, we'll embarrass Republicans, and we'll get the bill passed. Then I realized, wow, I'm in a different league, and I'm way over my head. But what I realized is that those 100-something trips to D.C. Went out the window, because what he did in one show snowballed. The next morning, Chef Smith from Fox reported on it, and then all the other news outlets followed. But he wasn't done with us in 2010. Everybody knows cancer wasn't added to the bill when we got it passed the first time. A few months later, John made a video for the Feal Good Foundation highlighting cancer. A few months later, John highlighted cancer on The Daily Show. Less than a year later, after the bill got passed, we got cancer added. Now we have 70 cancers. In 2012, I asked John to do a project with us, he did it. In 2013, I asked John for help, he did it. In 2015, when we had to get the bill renewed, we asked John to come down in September. He said, what do you want me to do? He came down on his own, no entourage, no yes men, no lawyers, no PR people, just John Stewart in t-shirt and jeans, and walked the halls of Congress with us. Everybody on my team in D.C., because I can't remember names, had a nickname. Whether it was Angry Bird or Tackleberry, everybody had a nickname, and John wanted a nickname. John wanted to embed himself, and John wanted to be part of the team. And I gave him the nickname Colbert, and he kicked me. But in the 12 years that I made 240-something trips to D.C., And in the 12 years that Ben Chavez from the 9/11 Health Watch, all the work that we did, John Stewart matched us in 2010 with one show, then 2 shows. And they came down to DC when he didn't even have a show anymore, but went on the show. And he came down there in September and November of 2015 and helped us get 75 years of health care. So he doesn't like accolades, he doesn't like that kind of attention, but let me tell you something. If I knew that I only needed John Stewart and didn't have to put in all those miles on my Jaguar, then I would never have gone to DC at all. And John's not done. John knows me about the work, and the beauty about getting to be friends with John, which trumps everything I've ever done, is that I now get to work with John outside of the 9/11 community doing other projects, and that's the most humbling thing I can do. So, without any further ado, Mr. Stephen Colbert.
So I was very happy to work with John, because anytime that somebody who is my height wants me to do something, I do it.
John Stewart for Vice President.
Yes, exactly. You really want us to fuck the whole country up. Me and John Feal, not a good idea.
Can't be worse than it is now.
That's a very good point, sir. I wasn't thinking that through. So John Feal is downplaying the work that he did over those 250 trips down there. The tireless effort of John and the other first responders that went down to DC, and they sowed the field. And you could see, you know, one of the important reasons why we're here today, and one of the important aspects of these types of conversations, is that the work to attain the benefits and the other support systems that are coming to you guys, that have been earned by everybody in this situation, is that the representatives that you have are not necessarily clued into it. And you can see it now as you watch the hurricanes. So one of the very strange things about our media is, I don't know if any of you have children. I have children, and when you watch them play soccer, before they're about 12 years old, they learn to play their positions. They basically just all chase the ball in a clump. And that is, for the most part, our national media. Ball, clump. But as soon as that ball gets kicked over there, they go as a clump, and they forget about these other stories. They've moved on. So you've got to make hay while the getting's good, because they're about to move on. Or you got to pick your shots. You got to have guys like John Feal and the Feal Good Foundation going down there and sowing the field, so when the time is right, you can shine a spotlight and you can make a difference in that moment. Right now, everybody's concerned about Harvey till Irma came along, and then suddenly that'll go away. I can tell you this, all those legislators in Texas that are asking for financial assistance from the federal government, which is important and which is necessary, voted against Sandy relief. So it gives you an idea that do not expect others to empathize with your situation. You have to be your own advocates. And you have to find groups like the Feal Good Foundation and others to amplify your voices. And if you can then find partners in the media that can help shine a spotlight on it at the right time. Don't blow your opportunities for coverage, because you're only going to get 1 or 2 shots at it. So when you get it, you want it to be effective, and you want it to be directed, and you want to have an idea, a concrete idea about what you want to accomplish with that moment in time. And I can tell you, sometimes you can accomplish more by not getting FaceTime with legislators than by getting it, because you can make hay with that. But I can tell you honestly, seeing the work that John did and the other groups and the first responders down there, they basically had to fight their own government to support their heroic actions. So the very same senators and Congress people that tweet out, never forget 9/11, never forget our heroes, forget them. So please do not ever be under the illusion that the things that they say that are political and meant to honor have any basis in reality in what their actual legislative actions will be. So I know that's a slightly sobering message for this, because here we are now, what is it, 15, 16 years out,
16.
and you're all still fighting. And I'm embarrassed about that, and it's truly shameful. I can tell you this, you're in good company though. We do work with veterans, it's the same situation. And ultimately what will happen is, we take for granted that first responders and veterans are there when we need them. But when we no longer have use for them, we ignore the needs. We create a situation, and whatever the collateral damage is, it is. So I think the point of these meetings and the point of the Feal Good Foundation is to remind people that, you know, there's going to come a day that a disaster is going to hit. And the first responder community and the veterans community won't be there for us because we did not show loyalty to them when they needed it. And so that's why I very much appreciate everybody being here today. It's why the work of John and Ben and all the tireless individuals that have to go down and hit these people over the head with a hammer. And unfortunately, one of the few things that works for them is public shame. That's where I come in. You know, generally, I don't have the organizing ability, I don't have the tenacity that John has, but I have a camera and an inherent sense of dickishness. So, unfortunately, at times, that's what's necessary. But do you have anything else to add, young man?
I was taking a walk back.
Were you taking a look at the pen? It is like having a third child. Part the pen, it'll be fun. Well, you know what? We'll get you a food voucher. We'll have a good time.
Don't forget the crayons.
Exactly. You want to take, so that's why it's important too. So you are the, I guess the point is, you are the force multiplier. You are the amplifier. So what you need to do is, you go from this room and you reach out to your network and you let as many people know that can know. And we run into people all the time. We went down to DC to lobby for the cancer moonshot, to include veterans and first responders within the cancer moonshot. The day that we were there, we're standing outside. It was John, myself, our good friend, unfortunately, recently passed away, Ray Pfeiffer, and a limo driver who just happened to be dropping people off comes up and he wants to thank them for their service, and he happens to mention, you know, 9/11. I was actually a first responder down in DC, and I came up to the pile in New York. And John's like, "Great, you in the program?" He's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And this is 6 years after Zadroga had been signed, and after we had tried to get it renewed. He still didn't know, and this is a guy that was suffering from 3 or 4 different 9/11 related ailments, and John immediately signed him up, and it all went from there. So his voice becomes multiplied by everyone that he comes in contact with, and this ain't over, unfortunately, and there are still things to come that, look, we were all here that day. You know that what was in the air that day was unholy, and the types of things that it's going to cause in the years to come, we just don't know yet, but it's coming. So please be vigilant and stay on it. Sir?
I'm good. So before you guys do a little Q&A with John, how cool would this be? So check this out. John lived in the geographic zone and is technically would be a survivor, right? So John was down.
Technically, I would be a survivor.
Imagine the attention we would bring to the program if John went into Bellevue for a physical. John Stewart.
I've been to Bellevue, not for a physical. It's an incident a few years ago. Everything's fine now.
Something to think about. It might help raise some numbers for the people in Lower Manhattan that don't know about the program.
All right.
My people will talk to your people.
All right. Wait, you are my people. I got nothing else.
Who's got a question for John Stewart?
Or John Feal.
He'll ask for you. If he's a survivor.
What?
There you go.
There you go. First question.
If he's a survivor, Stephanie Landau would be happy to register for the program.
So that's more of a comment than a question. You must work for the DOJ. question,
Although
raise
most
your
of my
hand.
health problems are related to being an older.
Keith, raise your hand. Go ahead, Keith.
John, will they be adding, I don't need that. Will they be adding the wives and husbands of responders? Because I've started to notice that some are getting sick. Like, there's one person that I can mention in particular that's very sick now, that needs help. Will they be adding these people to the bill?
That's a good
Hey,
question.
Ben, can you stand up for a second and answer that?
Wait,
Ben knows. No, Ben, stand up.
I really kind of doubt, that unless there was some actual, the legislation that was passed would allow for Dr. Howard to expand if there was some scientific evidence to that. And until there's some scientific evidence, I don't think that that's
Well,
something that.
Let me ask you this. What if they came in like some of these people have been telling me, when their wives or husbands, the people that have come home to them, the clothes are dirty and
Scientific basis and peer-reviewed science.
it's like secondhand smoke.
Again, there wouldn't be the peer-reviewed science that would allow for environmental hazards and secondary exposure like that. I'm not a health professional, I'm not a scientist. I can just tell you that until there was that sufficient amount of evidence, there's really no argument.
So I think, like the lawyer just said, Matt, if they had secondary exposure, they should document it. And I think that would help move the case study forward. Did I say that right? Yeah. I'm not a lawyer. Next question.
It does bring up that one of the important things about these studies that they do is they need baselines. Without baselines, it's very difficult to determine where the various scientific proofs lie. And that's why FDNY, because they had all those health records, made it much easier for these guys to be able to prove those links. So you do need baseline studies.
John, JJ. In terms of, I appreciate the fact that you are working the veteran aspect in that, because a lot of the veterans, oh, sorry. Because of your work with incorporating veterans, because Long Island has the largest veteran population in New York State in the Northeast Corridor, and working with veterans is something that I've decided that I've missioned myself to do in light of my post 9/11 experience. So how can we incorporate that? Because as we all know, that first line of supportive protection, working down at ground zero, assisting the National Guard, things like that, how can we incorporate that as an outreach to get more individuals to kind of sign up when you see that?
So some of that is related to, one of the few examples, the reason that veterans are such an important aspect of the project, not just because of the type of heroic work that they do, but also the type of cancers that come out of 9/11 are very similar to what are called burn pits that you would find in Iraq and Afghanistan. And a lot of our veterans have been exposed to, it's very unusual to have these kinds of chemicals burn at these kinds of temperatures and be inhaled by people. So when veterans are by these burn pits, they are finding similar studies with the types of health issues that they're having versus 9/11. So it's reaching out to another community, one of the only other communities that has also experienced this type of toxic influx into their bodies, and so what causes that as well. So again, it's not a whole lot of other groups that are ever going to face that type of poisoning. So I think that's an important aspect of it. And what you can learn from those cancers, you can then apply to the veterans' cancers as well.
Go ahead.
I have a question for John Feal. I understand last year the Droga bill was extended for 99 years. Is that for benefits, or does that include registration, or is there a deadline to register?
Last year, December 15, signed into law in January 16, the healthcare was extended for 75 years. The VCF was extended, the VCF is extended for 5, the healthcare for 75. And that's for healthcare to get treated or monitored, and then that's to get compensated for your illnesses. So in 2019, 2020, we'll be back in DC again, and Ben Chevette, myself, and others, and the lawyers will be advocating to get that bill extended.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Andrew Alina. I was a 911 first responder, and I was also in the National Guard at the time. In my circumstance, I ended up finding out that because I was in the National Guard, I felt it was state active duty because President Bush made all the military personnel a state issue. With our situation, we don't get any retirement funds. We didn't receive any assistance in filing for state workers' comp because we don't qualify. We go into a different program which is ran by the Naval Affairs, which puts us in the category of veterans where we had to wait I don't know, 20 or 30 years before we received anything from the state for our situation that happened to us down in Ireland. I got there the very next day, very early in the morning, and I was at the morgue. I worked on a pit. I have had multiple illnesses, things that have happened to me to my body, and a lot of this stuff was not covered under the program. And I was 25 years of age at the time. My life was all ahead of me, and literally within a year, I couldn't even run or walk anymore. I had problems breathing, lungs, stomach, you name it. And I've been working on a situation to help with people who are not covered under these programs, who are pushed out and find themselves in the loophole. And so I've been working on building a solar farm upstate New York, and I realized that the energy that I create there, I'll be able to at least cover the cocaines that are not covered by these programs. And so I've been pushing hard and using whatever I can financially to do these programs. What should I do in order to
Should be covered by the drug. Have you signed up for it?
Ben Chevette?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. Regardless of whether you were activated in the National Guard, you should be covered by the program for your illnesses, and you should be able to file a claim with the VCF. So I'm happy to talk to you. I don't understand. There are, I know when I'm working with Congressman Maloney, we actually worked on legislation and we got National Guard, the time served to count towards retirement benefits, which hadn't done because of some issues with the way the Guard was activated. But I'm happy to talk to you. You should be covered by Roga if you meet the program criteria. I can talk to you.
Hi, my name is Karen Colucci, and I just want to make an important comment, I think, at least for me, and I hope others can relate and appreciate this, that this is such an important conversation, and more people, everyone needs to be introduced to this conversation and invited, because even as a September 11th family member, I lost my fiance, Peter Frank, who was Tower 1. Now, I also happen to be a therapist and mental health person. So I had my own roller coaster, and it honestly was not until recent years that I was able to start wrapping my head around the rest of this huge picture that we're talking about right now when it comes to survivors and rescue workers and responders, because I was in a family place. And that we all have to see it as one puzzle that we're a piece of, and that it's not segregated. And I want to say first, thank you. I can't bring my fiance back. That this is, this. There's nothing I can do about that loss except work on myself and help others who suffer similar challenges in life. But I can help support the people that are still here, who are suffering physically and emotionally, and bring them into the fold and realize that there is no hierarchy of importance, but the priorities are keeping those that can respond in the future with us, and not send this message of, like John was saying, you're here when we need you, and then call you later. Something that I'll offer that has to be effective with veterans is maybe directing this information to friends and family members of their buddies. Like, if you want to help your buddy, bring him to this program. Because to try to say, oh, I want you to come, I think you need help, sometimes just they recoil. But if you give them the power to say, you can help but, or your neighbor, or your student, or your family member, your cousin, because you have the power to help get them into this conversation, help get them into these different programs. That might be another strategy.
Well, the conversation is needed every day of the year, not just around the anniversary. When we were walking the halls of Congress and Ben was directing us and pointing us in a direction, we weren't just advocating for 9/11 responders. That was civilians, volunteers, people all over Manhattan. That was part of our daily rhetoric. That's when I was handing out what I call the Bible, the book, that everybody handed out when we went to meetings. That was responders, volunteers, survivors, people all over Manhattan. Voices of September 11th and the Feal Good Foundation, we have two different mission statements. But we seem to partner every year, and while we take different paths on our objectives, we always find ourselves together at the end trying to better the 9/11 community. So it could be March 4th, it could be June 8th. This conversation needs to happen all the time. Because what's going to happen, and I'm never wrong. No, this one's serious. We're going to get sicker. You're on the cusp of the asbestos cancers. You're now talking an average age of about 57, 58 for 9/11 responders. Age sucks by itself. Now age is debilitating illnesses. This will get worse, and this conversation has to grow. The compassion has to grow, and the understanding has to grow, and everybody together has to put away the egos and work together, because we're trying to serve a small fraternity, a small fraction of our country. That was our greatest resource 16 years ago.
One of the things that was interesting about when we went down to DC was, if you remember, politicians are very keen on talking about 9/11 as a unifying event for this country. Everybody talked about 9/12. Well, one of the interesting things that happened is when the rubber met the road financially, they all talked about 9/11 as a local issue. And so when you went down there, so they were very clear to stand on the steps of the Capitol and saying this land is your land. But when we went down there, it was a lot about like, you know, this is like New York and New Jersey, what does that have to do with us? Well, if I remember, I think they attacked the United States. So remember that you will be up against some things that will blow your mind in terms of its lack of empathy and understanding and myopia. And so it's really important, again, to continue to advocate in those ways.
Yeah, I think being future-oriented is very important.
Yes.
Because even though you may be asymptomatic right now, doesn't mean you're necessarily going to be next year, or that you're even healthy now. You may have subclinical symptoms that can be treated early on.
And the other important, I think, the point that you were making is dead on, which is people's friends. A lot of times with the first responder and veteran community, there's a stoicism there that is part of the ethos of that community. And oftentimes, the best way to get somebody help is to get their spouse involved. You know, because that may be the only person they would listen to as far as a health issue was concerned.
I wanted to respond to John's comment about people asking for baseline data and the fact that there's only one baseline for the FDNY. The truth is that there's an enormous amount of work being done for cancer research.
Right.
And people are actually creating almost what I would call parallel population databases all over the country. And so it's really important for people to identify or in a way to aggregate the data about this community and compare it with others. Because I'm not so sure, I would argue that this community has suffered in many ways because of 9/11. And I think the baseline data is there. It's just for us to reach out or find people, whether it's people in the valley, in Silicon Valley, who are working on cancer databases. There's a guy from the University of Washington who is a guy called Steve Friend, who is working on patient databases in terms of treatment. But I think that if we reach out, we will find databases and baselines that we can compare and work against.
That's a good point.
So, unfortunately, Mary has us on a tight schedule. John's got, and it's like, it's all right when everybody else runs overtime, right, Mary? I see what 9 grand cost me today. Also, John changed some things around the schedule today that made it possible for him to get here, and he does have to go. So I think we all can say thank you to John Stewart.
It's John's work. Like I've never been more impressed by a guy. Like his ability to tenaciously stay at it was what kept the field, you know, plowed, so that you could come in there and do anything. And that's the work that you guys do, and it's crucial. It's the only thing that keeps this in the national conversation. So thank you all very much for
One more thing, Karen, to what you were saying. We are tweeting, sending information out with a campaign on spreading the word last year. You know, we're working with the CDC and the World Trade Center Health Program to help promote, not just promote, but to help people in the process of applying to the program. And one of the big challenges that we've had, I think in both communities actually, is people understanding that they're part of a community. I think it was about 5 years ago, we had Morgan Stanley do an analysis of how many people survived. And we calculate it's about 500,000 people that were either in the buildings or you know, living in the community. And that might be an underestimation. And so, you know, we're happy to include you to help us spread the word. And I think defining the community, even responders, think about all the mental health people. Think about Mike Allison, the people in the media that were down here covering the event that were exposed to those toxins. And what we're seeing in the research is that I think it's the 5th highest diagnosis is PTSD. And there's a lot of physical complications that people are having from a mental health disorder. And we hear it every day from people that are calling our office. So, you know, we're happy to, you know, if you're not on our distribution list, happy to help you, help us spread the word. And the other thing about survivors is it covers any out-of-pocket costs that people have. But at some point, they may lose their job and not have insurance. And so you want to make sure that you're at least enrolled in the program so that, God forbid, you do come down with medical complications, that you have access to what is really, I mean, I can't say enough about the doctors that are working at all of these hospitals. And, you know, the protocols are very different for somebody that was exposed to toxins in the air. You know, if they have bronchitis or asthma, you know, the protocols are very different for, I'll say, you know, the man on the street that has asthma. If they were exposed to those toxins, they really need certain protocols, and they need to be addressing it earlier rather than later. So, you know, we're happy to help you, help us spread the word. So thank you, and thanks to John.
My name is Fetchet with 9/11 Health Watch, and we have a really good panel. Obviously, we have Mr. Buttigieg, who is the special master, who's now been on the job for about a year, more than a year, and is really working hard to process the claims and get people the awards that they need and deserve. With her are her excellent, we have titles now, Deputy Special Masters and Director Jordan Feldman and Stephanie Langston. And with them is Michael Barish, partner at Barish, McGarry, Salzman, and Benson, hopefully I pronounced that right, who probably represents everyone in this room. With him is Matt McCauley, partner at Turkin and Heath, who I talk to all the time about police matters. He's actually both a lawyer and he was a 9/11 responder, and so a member of NYPD. And we have at the end, Deborah at the New York State Worker Compensation Board. So I think the program that Mary wants me to follow is to have everyone speak for a few minutes. I don't know whether the VCF are all speaking, but you're welcome to go ahead. So, go ahead.
So thank you very much. My name, as Ben said, is Rupa
You have to pull the microphone closer.
Better? Is that better? Yes. Back? Okay. My name is Rupa Bhattacharya. I am the Special Master for the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund. I wanted to thank you all and thank Mary for having us back here today. It's always such a nice experience for us to be able to put faces on the claims that we see. So often for us, it's paper and phone calls, but it's nice to be able to see actual faces. We know that every claim that we see represents a life that's been changed by the events of September 11th. And so we're very privileged to be here, and it's been an honor for me to work on the program. I'm here with my deputies, Jordy Feldman and Stephanie Langston. We wanted to give you a very brief update on where we are with the Victims Compensation Fund in terms of the claims that are pending and the claims that have already been processed. Jordy's going to talk a little bit about some of the changes in policy that have been made in the last year, and then Stephanie's going to talk a little bit about our outreach efforts, because we know there's still a lot of people, as with the health program, who aren't aware that the fund is available to them. So just to focus for a moment on the statistics, one of my largest priorities coming into the fund just over a year ago was to really try to speed up claims processing. We know that a lot of people have been waiting a very long time for their compensation, and so we have put a tremendous focus in the last year on trying to decrease the amount of time that it takes from a claim is submitted until a claim is paid. And I feel like we've made some progress in that area, but we know that there is a lot of work still to do. Just in terms of where we are, we have processed we have made nearly 17,000, actually over 17,000 compensation determinations. About 14,000 of those are first-time determinations, and the remainder are amendments for people who are coming back into the program after being paid once because they've suffered a new loss or have contracted a new condition. As of the end of August, we have paid over $3 billion in compensation to our claimants. We still have a lot of claims pending. We have about 7,000 claims still pending in compensation review, and we have another several thousand claims that are still pending in eligibility review. We have made a number of changes to the program to try to speed up the claim processing, and one of the things that I always try to point out is that of the 17,000 determinations that have been made, over 5,000 of them have been made in the last year. So nearly a third of the claim determinations that have been made by the program have been made in the last year, and over $200 million has been paid out in the last year alone. In the last 2 months, we processed over 600 claims. So we are trying to move up our processing windows. We're trying to get money out to people who need it faster, and we're doing what we can to do that. The other thing I wanted to point out, and it's consistent with some of the things that the doctors were talking about earlier, in the last year we have processed 4 times as many deceased claims as we did in all of the years previous. So we are starting to see more claims come in from people who are passing away as a result of their not living conditions, and we're hopeful that the compensation that we can provide at least brings a little bit of solace to their families. Our population remains heavily tilted towards responders. About 75% of our claimants come from the responder community, self-identify as coming from the responder community, about 25% from the survivor community. We are starting to see an increased number of survivor filings, and I think that's a little bit due to some of the outreach efforts that Stephanie's going to talk about, and I know the law firms have been doing quite a bit of outreach as well, but we think there are more people who are affected by 9/11 in the survivor community that we're not reaching, and so we're looking for ways to try to increase the knowledge about the availability of the program to them. I'm going to try to save time for questions. I'm going to turn it over to Jordy, but please, thank you very much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Hi, good morning. I'm Jordy Feldman. I'm a Deputy Special Master of the VCF and also the Director of our New York office, which is right down the street at 290 Broadway, where we hold all of our hearings for people who were denied eligibility from through the process or who are challenging the amount of compensation that we award. So really welcome to come in for a hearing. And our office is right down the street. As Rupa said, we are continually focused on ways to streamline and speed up the claims process. And over the past year, we've adopted or updated policies to that end that we believe are fair to claimants and are faithful to the statute. As Dr. Wyden and Dr. Moline said at the earlier panel, we're mindful that we can't affect the outcome in the cases in terms of the health, but we do everything we can to try to mitigate some of the issues that the claimants are feeling and in ways that we can. So when we can find ways to minimize burden and speed things up, we're always looking to do that. I'm going to highlight some of the changes for you. There have been many since Rupa was appointed last year, but in the interest of time, I'm just going to highlight a few that I think are probably most directly relevant for this group. One that we touched on last year for anyone who was at this panel, but it was really hot off the presses, and just based on some of the questions here I thought might be worthwhile to mention again, is registration. In our process, there are two parts. You register with the program, and then you file your full claim. Registering your claim is just your opportunity to preserve your right to file a claim in the future, anytime before December 18, 2020. Under our old policy, under the statute, there is a 2-year deadline. Under our old policy, it was 2 years that started running from the date that you were diagnosed with your condition. What we found, based on feedback from the survivor community, and even beyond the survivor community, with law enforcement, non-local law enforcement, people outside of the New York City area, was that they may have known that they had a cough or they were sick, but they never officially had it linked to their 9/11 exposure. And so what we did last year, was about a year ago, is we changed the trigger date from the date that you're diagnosed from your condition to the date that you have been determined to have that the link has been determined. So for the most part, it's that you've gotten a certification letter from the World Trade Center Health Program saying you are certified for your condition. Or it may be if another government entity found that there was a link between your condition and your exposure, whichever is earlier. And we adopted that rule because we realized that under the old rule it may have shut out people who really were there, and this program was intended to benefit. So under the new registration deadlines, which at this point aren't even so new, like I said, it's for the most part triggered off of the date of your certification letter. And just something to note, there's been a lot of talk about in the earlier panels too about the survivor clinics and responder clinics. The VCF makes absolutely no distinction for purposes of eligibility, the way the claims process goes, the calculation of rewards. We do have statistics on them, that those are all self-identified in the claim form, but we make no distinction in terms of how we process the claims. Another change that I wanted to highlight is that to receive compensation, one of the things you need to show is that you have an eligible physical injury or condition that was determined to be a result of your 9/11 exposure. Since the beginning of the VCF, we've generally relied on a certification by the World Trade Center Health Program to make that determination. The VCF and the World Trade Center Health Program work very closely together and exchange information regarding conditions for which a claimant is certified for treatment. We do have an alternative process. It's called the private physician process, where a claimant can submit medical records to the VCF rather than going to the health program to evaluate whether a condition is the result of the attacks or debris removal efforts. A couple months ago, we decided jointly with NIOSH, which is the federal agency that administers the health program, to limit the scope and availability of that private physician process and direct claimants to World Trade Center Health Program centers. A change that benefits both of our programs and claimants. Again, one of the things you heard today is that the program needs the data, and in order to, by directing claimants to the health program, they can expand their research base. So it really is a benefit to both the programs and the claimants. What that means is that with limited exceptions, we will not process a claim until we receive notification from the health program that a claimant's been certified for at least one physical condition. And just to note there, the criteria for our program and the health program overlaps to a large extent, but there are some differences, one of which is that by statute, our program only compensates for physical injuries. So we cannot, special master has no discretion to award any compensation for any mental health issues. So you may be getting treated for your mental health issues by the World Trade Center Health Program, but those are not compensable by our program. Just to keep in mind for people who are thinking about participating or are participating in the health program, you can continue to see your private physician and participate in the health program. But just to keep in mind that the mission of the health program is to provide medical treatment for individuals, and they triage appointments based on the medical needs. So if you are going to the health program for purposes of getting a certification for the VCF, just keep in mind that it may take some time. As you've heard, the numbers have really increased significantly, and so they're trying to manage that in an appropriate way. And then on the compensation side, for those of you who aren't so familiar, the VCF awarding has three different components: non-economic loss, economic loss, and collateral offsets. The non-economic loss is the pain and suffering award that varies based on the type of the condition, the severity of the condition, and the effect on life. All claimants receive non-economic loss that's deducted. We have to deduct certain offsets, payments just required by statute, but anyone who is eligible for a non-economic loss award. One of the things that we've noticed over the last year, we've really tried to clarify is that the non-economic loss award is not tied to the number of certified conditions. It is based on severity and the impact on life. We also posted on our website, and you'll see if you want to just log on www.bcf.gov, we have a lot of information there. One of the things that we posted was some more information about the range of non-economic loss awards. We are capped by statute up to $90,000 for non-cancer claims or $250,000 for cancer claims. There is a range below that also can come into play, and there's more information on our website that can talk about the distinctions there. But generally, if you have a condition that has a consistent, sustained, or severe impact on your quality of life, it would go on the upper end of the range. And then for milder conditions, it would go down from there. The other type of loss we award for is economic loss. That is, we only award those losses if a claimant has an occupational disability due to an eligible condition based on a determination by a government entity. I don't want to get into wonky territory, but just while we have the forum, I do want to try to get some of the context before I just talk about the changes. Those are the types of disability determinations from Social Security, Workers' Comp, FDNY, NYSERS, NYPD. You basically, in order to get lost earnings, you must have a determination that you're disabled from working. One of the things that we have with the World Trade Center Health Program is what's called the World Trade Center Health Program Disability Evaluation Process. That's a process that was designed and developed by the VCF and NIOSH for World Trade Center Health Program members who meet certain criteria. And it includes those who don't have a disability determination based on an eligible condition from a third party and don't really have access to one. So those people may be eligible for that process and get a disability determination, which would open the door for earnings loss by the VCF. Over the last year, we made some changes to that process by tailoring the criteria so that it provided the benefit that it was intended to provide when we created it. And just a note that the VCF works as a gatekeeper for that process. You have to submit a request to the VCF if you want to be considered. You should not be approaching your physician to ask them for an evaluation. And then if someone is determined to be a candidate for the process, we contact NIOSH. NIOSH contacts the clinical center where you are a member, and you go make an appointment, and then you'll get an evaluation that you'll then submit to the VCF. But just to note that just because you get a disability evaluation does not mean that you would necessarily be qualified for earnings loss. There are a lot of other factors that are at play. And then just two other quick things. As I mentioned, in order to get a lost earnings award, you have to have a disability determination for an eligible condition. Over the last year, one of the things we struggled with, we're not the medical side of things. We are more on the legal and policy side. And so what we were struggling with were claimants who were certified for a condition like asthma, but they were disabled by Social Security for chronic bronchitis. And to us, because we couldn't tell if those were actually the same condition or not, and so we did a lot of work with NIOSH, with the World Trade Center Health Program doctors, and ultimately decided that we could, for purposes of determining a match in order to award lost earnings, that we would treat as equivalent any condition that was that is considered all obstructive airway diseases, all interstitial lung diseases we treat as equivalent, and all upper respiratory conditions we treat as equivalent. Prior to that, we would have to really try to do it on an ad hoc basis and understand from the World Trade Center Health Program certifying you for one condition and Social Security for another. We'd have to do a lot of extra legwork to figure out if they were the same. And we adopted this with the idea that and after conversations with the doctors, where different doctors might name something, the same condition, something different, and we didn't want to create that barrier for claimants who really were disabled due to their certified conditions, but just the name wasn't an exact match. And then the last change I wanted to highlight is medical expenses. We do award for medical expenses, but over the last year, we really limited the circumstances under which we do award them. Under the new policy, they're only considered when they're filed as a compensation amendment after an initial award has been determined. Under our program, you can file a claim and then amend your claim if there are new losses or new conditions anytime up to December 2020. And only if the total amount of the claimed expenses exceeds $2,000, with some limited exceptions. Like I said, and Ruben mentioned earlier at the beginning, that we established these limitations in an effort to speed up the processing time, and in accordance with the statutory directive that we are to prioritize funding to claimants with the most debilitating conditions. Like we said, the health program is our sister program. We expect that, especially in directing claimants to the program, we expect that most of their medical expenses will be treated for their eligible, or be covered for their eligible conditions, and so we have limited the criteria for awarding those losses.
So we have officially crossed into good afternoon. I'm going to talk a little bit about our outreach efforts, particularly over the past year. So following the reauthorization, we spent the first 6 months afterwards really focusing on getting our updated regulations out, revamping our claim form. And so it really was about a year ago that we started to focus intensely on outreach. One of the things that is different for the VCF than for the health program is we actually do not have an outreach budget. So the way that our funding is set up, excuse me, is we have one pot of money, and that money covers all of our administrative costs, anything we do related to outreach or operating the fund, as well as the money that is paid to victims. So we are very, very careful every day in everything we do to preserve as much of that money as possible for the actual claims. So we really look for opportunities to piggyback on others when we're doing our outreach efforts, but we also recognize, along the lines of what was said on the panel this morning, that there are thousands out there who have no idea that the VCF exists, and that's the group that we are really trying to reach. So we've done a number of activities over the past year, and particularly in recent months. At the start of August, we partnered with the health program, and we did a mailing to every single one of their members, which I think was a little over 70,000 members. And we did a mailing specific to the VCF. So it had a cover letter and then a fact sheet about the VCF. That resulted in about 1,800 calls to our helplines specifically from the mailing in the month of August. And we are pretty sure that's one of the reasons that our registrations in the month of August were 80% higher than the month before. So in the month of August alone, we had over 1,100 registrations, which again is the first step just to preserve the right to file a claim. Just earlier this week, RUPA participated in a 9/11 Health Watch Facebook Live event that was also, I know, sponsored by the Feal Good Foundation. And the three of us also attended the Survivor Steering Committee meeting, really trying to get the word out about how the VCF operates and talk with some of the representatives from the different groups there. For the past year, we have been going every month to the Responder Steering Committee meeting, which has also just further enhanced our working relationship with NIOSH and has really given us direct access to the people at the clinics. And so by doing that, it then led to opportunities for us to help with the VCF information that's in the benefits handbook, the information that the caseworkers have. Again, just trying to make sure that the right information is out there and reaching the right people. We've also, or RUPA has done a few interviews recently. One was on Federal News Radio, which is on the internet, but predominantly in the DC area. There's a Frontline podcast that will be aired sometime in October. And then RUPA did an interview with the Toledo Glade newspaper, which we expect will be published sometime in the next month or two as well. We also have been working with the health registry to try and figure out a way to reach those who are part of the health registry. And so we have drafted and are working with them on production of a short video for their website. They've been doing these videos recently, and they have been they've gotten very positive response to it. So they came up with the idea of doing a short video on the VCF, and we've been working to finalize that with them as well. We also have taken a look at where our registrations are coming from. We have registrations from every state and numerous countries outside of the United States. And we identified the states where we have at least a couple hundred registrations or above and are doing a targeted mailing to the members of Congress from those states. It's actually going out tomorrow on Monday, dated on September 11th. With a fact sheet and a short blurb that they can use in their newsletters to their constituents, on their websites, essentially saying, we know you have some number of constituents in your state who have registered with the VCF. We believe there may be more, and we need your help in getting the word out to those. We also will be attending a meeting with some of the unions later this month, the last week of September, and we'll have some representatives at the Research to Care conference in October that was mentioned earlier this morning as well. So we are constantly looking for ways to reach people who don't know about the VCF but may be eligible for the VCF, and we are always open to suggestions. Anything that we can do that is in partnership with another entity helps us, again, to just keep the costs low, because we really are very sensitive to that aspect of it. One last thing I'll say that is going back a year, one of the big changes that we had rolled out just before this conference last year was our new claim form. And we have received a lot of positive comments on it. It's streamlined, it's a much easier form to get through. And we have a helpline that is ready to set up appointments with people by phone to help walk them through the form. For those individuals who are not represented by an attorney, we have an incredibly proactive effort in our helpline where we reach out to claimants. Once we send them a letter, we call them to follow up. We ask them if they understand the documents that we need. We really make an effort to try and help people get a complete claim filed so that once it's picked up for review, we're able to render a decision as quickly as possible. So I would encourage you, if you have questions about the claims process or your claim or the VCF in general, our helpline is a terrific resource, as is the website. And we are constantly posting new information to our website, and of course our policies and procedures document, which outlines everything we do and how eligibility is determined, how awards are calculated, and the various policies that govern our operation. So with that,
thank you. Hi everyone, I'm Michael Barish. I'm an attorney. Please don't hold that against me. I will, first of all, I want to thank the three of you, Rupa, Jordy, Steph, and of course Jackie and Catherine, the unsung heroes of all this, because it's like night and day. I've been involved since the first Victim Compensation Fund with you, Jordy, and you. Yes. And, but even in the last few years, the Victim Compensation Fund is running really so much more, as you said. You really made it so much easier, and I will correct my website. I'm sorry for that, but thanks for pointing it out. I'm probably best known to the 9/11 community because just by accident, I represented Detective Jimmy Zadroga. And I'll never forget Jimmy sitting in my office with his then 4-year-old daughter who was changing his oxygen containers. Jimmy had pulmonary fibrosis, and as one of his last wishes, he said, I really want an autopsy to be done, so maybe that can help the 9/11 community. And as Dr. Michael Wyden, the pulmonologist, said earlier this morning, this whole thing wouldn't exist without the data. And Jimmy's, the pathology report from the autopsy showed jet fuel, chromium, lead, benzene, ground glass in his lung tissues. Without that evidence, we don't have the link to the now 68 cancers. So I'm not going to speak for long. I just wanted to echo something that Mary has said, something that we're all trying to get. I mean, we need you to get the word out there to the rest of the 9/11 community. This was incredibly democratic, toxic dust. It didn't matter if you were a firefighter or a police officer or a construction worker. I mean, my office alone now represents 12 then school children with cancer. And I guarantee, because I hear every single day from people who said, I didn't know. The government said the air was safe. Why should I have thought that the cancer I had in 2010 was in any way related to my exposure? Well, they didn't clean the schools. They just reopened the 12 schools south of Canal Street. And it's tragic to see how many young, they're not kids anymore, they're 28 to 32, and how many of these people are getting sick today. So please, if you know people who are sick, they don't need an attorney. As we just heard today, they can do this by themselves, but they certainly should register with the health program. That is the single most important thing. Get your annual checkups. Tell people you know who've been there. Get involved, and don't let anybody. It's just heartbreaking when people miss deadlines. Don't let anybody do that. Thank you.
As Ben introduced me, my name is Matthew McCauley. I'm a retired nurse. Microphone. Is that better?
No.
It's on.
My name is Matthew McCauley. I'm a retired New York City police officer. I was a 9/11 first responder, and I am an attorney. So you can hold that part of me. I just want to echo the sentiment that Michael just had as far as the hard work that the VCF puts into it. One way that I can explain this is they are actually a federal agency and a federal government agency that cares. They do have a pulse, and they do actually want to take care of people that are out there that are qualified and need help. The thing that starts with that for them to help you is the registrations. The registrations, as we've also are just very important. for the health program as well as for the VCF. In the health program, I can give you an example. Before, the gentleman sitting up front said, that people are not registered because they're fine. I'm fine, that's why I'm not registered. Michael and I, and Rupa and Jordy and Stephanie have the unfortunate handling of cases where what they're called expedited cases, where people are not fine. And quite frankly, they're generally people who are passing away. There's nothing more tear-jerking when somebody calls you up and says, I've got stage 4 bone cancer, stage 4 cancer metastasized to my bone, and I've been given 2 months to live. I am not in the Victims Compensation Fund. I'm not in the World Trade Center Health Program. I can tell you myself and Michael, we work in different firms, we have the same mentality. Okay, first and foremost, medical care. We want to make sure you're taken care of when it comes to the medical care, because that's the thing that's going to concern people. Am I going to run up and bankrupt my family? They have concerns. Getting people into the health program before they are sick is incredibly important. We've got John Feal, John Stewart, Voices of 9/11, who are all out there trying to get people into the health program. It's not just because you're sick, it's because when you get sick, then the process is already underway. And if God, hopefully you never do, but if the process is underway, it allows Rupert and her team to move your case along faster. I've had to deal with cases where I've expedited cases, gone to the VCF and said, this person is dying of cancer. Here's the proof they were there. Here's the certification. Can we do something before they pass away? Because the reality is, regardless of what union you're in or anything else, if you pass away, it may be determined to be line of duty later on, but there's a cold reality where there's no benefits to come into your family for a little while, or there's a burden on the person who's sick. It feels like they're going to be a burden on their family. They work very quickly to get things done so that there's not that burden. And Michael and I, in different instances, go up and you're giving a check to somebody who's thanking you. That person's in a very bad situation and they're thanking you. They're not thanking me. They're also a responder like I was, but they're now taking a turn for the worse. Getting into the health program, very important, because that's the first thing. Because the next thing you know, if you have cancer, you get sick, it allows the program itself to move along also on the healthcare side, because now they're just talking about certifying your healthcare. Now they're just talking about getting you the benefits that you need to have. And then on the other side of that is the Victims Compensation Fund coming along and trying to help you out as well. It's important also for the registrations when it comes to the Victims Compensation Fund, because there are deadlines. Some people don't know if they were there. Information wasn't put out there to purposely trip people up, but over the last 16 years, there's a lot of different information out there. People think that they're in the health program, they're automatically registered for the VCF. People think they're in the registry, they're automatically in the VCF. It's a very easy way to find out if somebody or somebody you know is registered for the VCF. Call the VCF. It takes about 30 seconds. It's 1-855-885-1555. That's the phone number to the VCF. And you call them up with your date of birth, your social security number, and your name. In about 90 seconds, they're going to tell you if you're registered or not. That's about how long it takes.
And I will say, if you're not registered, you can register over the phone. Registration is as simple as Matt said, some basic biographical information, and it just preserves your rights. So even if you're not sick yet, there is no harm in registering, and then you can decide whether or not to file a claim before the deadline in 2020. But you can actually just call and register over the phone, or you can go online and do it. Sorry, Matt.
No, that's fun. I just want to spend my time to introduce myself to everybody. To me, the most important thing is registration. Hopefully you're not sick. I'm sure who in here knows somebody that's not registered for the health program that they know is eligible? The whole room, pretty much? Yes. That's the whole thing. Why? Survivor's guilt. I have survivor's guilt. I watched the second plane. I saw the first plane go by my window and saw the second plane hit the window. Hit the building. There's survivor's guilt amongst all of us. It's a program that's for somebody else. John will tell you, that's not a reason. You know, it's not for somebody else. It's there for everybody that's qualified for it. So register for the programs. If you have any questions, you can reach out to the VCF, Michael, myself, when it comes to the health programs. Voices of 9/11 and John Feal. Their names are up there in the Feal Good Foundation. They register more people than anybody around. Reach out to them. Thank you.
It's working?
Yeah, there you go.
Hey, good. I'll do it this way, it might be better. You'll have to excuse me, I just had an operation recently that went bad, and I may lose my voice at any time, but in the meantime, I'm Ed Ruff, and I'm the advocate for injured workers at the Workers' Compensation Board. We all seem to have the same message today. registering these programs. Excuse me. I'm not going to talk about the Victims Compensation Fund outside of its impact on workers' compensation. If you're receiving benefits from workers' compensation, I can't even see that, and you're registered for Victims Compensation Fund, the money you receive from us will be taken as an offset in your settlement. I just want you to all know that up front. My main goal today is to try to get people who participated in the recovery cleanup of the World Trade Center through September 12, 2002 to register with the New York State Workers' Compensation Board to preserve their rights for future benefits if they have coming. It's estimated that 60,000 to 100,000 people worked as rescue, recovery, cleanup at Ground Zero, Fresh Kill, landfill, the barges, the piers, and the mooring. And yet today, workers' compensation has a little more than 5,579 claimants that were paying some kind of indemnity payments to. And we have only 38,166 unique workers' compensation WCT 12 forms on file. Where are the rest of these people? We need your help and the help of everybody you know to contact anybody that worked in any way during these times in these places to register with us. I don't want to see one person who's entitled to benefits lose out because they forgot to file, or they didn't file, or they didn't know about filing. Jeannie Kelly, who works for Mount Sinai, is tirelessly out in fire departments and police departments and rescue squads every day around the whole state trying to get these people to file. In my own town, I go to Troy, New York. In my own town, she went to that fire department, called me up to come and be with her. There was at least 9 firemen that were down there that have yet to file, and yet they're getting sick. My office handles every death claim in the state of New York where somebody dies on the job from either injury or sickness. We've handled all the World Trade Center death cases. And every day, 16 years later, I'm still getting these claims. It's time for us to stand up and really get out there and do this push. Because when 9/11/2018 comes and we stop accepting these claims, where are these people going to be? Or where are we going to be? Are we going to be fighting again with the state and fighting again with Washington to keep this going as far as opening up registration again? It might not happen. It's been 16 years. Don't lift your friends down, your neighbors down, anybody down that worked with you and worked with us at the World Trade Center. If they did the cleanups, if they worked there, they were volunteers or employees, get them to register with us, get them to be entitled to their future for any claims or benefits that may come down. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. So we'll take some questions. I just want to preface, I think if you're asking about specific cases, Justice Department's not going to be able to talk publicly about your case, but they're here to answer general questions. So just having said that, sure, the gentleman in the back.
To the panel as a whole, and particularly to the last speaker, you're being asked to submit another affidavit, another request form to a third party. Can we ask the three of you to now get together the way the first two people are, the victims' compensation and the medical monitoring?
Yeah, I'm going to answer that. The answer is no, because again, the way our government works, we have different levels of government. So the federal government is working by design. The legislation gets both entities to work together. On the state level, which it works for, it would be too difficult to do. It's very, very simple though. It's not, and I think the materials from the Work Comp Board that they actually have on the table that I helped them draft really try to make it explicit. In order to register, if you're if you were an employee in New York State, you should register to protect your worker comp. It's a simple form, that's it. After that, you should register with the VCF. And then the health program, you can always just sign up. That's basically the 3 programs. There's another program called the registry. Again, it can get confusing. You're probably right, when this all started, had there been better planning, we would have worked on what to call things. There's something called the health registry, which everyone thinks that they've signed up, which they may have signed up for. That's actually closed. You can't join that. That's the study that is run by the New York City Department of Health. But people always confuse that because it says registry in it. But that's actually the only registry that you can't sign up for, since it's a longitudinal study. So let me get someone else, unless someone wants to add to that.
So I just wanted to add one thing. So it is true that we are very different programs and different processes. We all have our own enrollment processes and our own registration deadlines and whatnot. But there is, thanks to our Black people, like Jordy Feldman, there is a tremendous amount of information sharing that goes on amongst all of the programs. That when you register for the VCF, you sign an authorization form as part of your claim form that allows us to get information from the health program, from the FDNY, from NYPD, from workers' comp. And we are able to use that information as part of our process to try to lessen the burden on claimants as to how much information they need to submit to the VCF. It still does require you to actually register for each program separately, but there is a tremendous amount of information sharing amongst all 3 programs.
Sure. The one right there in red. Sure.
Yes. If you have Social Security disability from something prior to September 11th, but then we're also a member of the community, a survivor, or whatever, how can you find out what the level of offset would be if you go to the trouble of getting registered for VCF or Workers' Comp Board? Where is that information available? Is it 100% offset? Somebody here did mention an offset. Is it 100%? Does anybody know? Or do you have to go through
They
and
know.
find out?
Sorry.
So what the statute, so we also have, speaking of information sharing relationships, we also have an information sharing relationship with the Social Security Administration. We do get information about, again, we're authorized by the claimant to get information from Social Security about the benefits that are being received. Our statute requires us to offset from the VCF award other benefits, including federal benefits, that are paid as a result of the eligible condition. So if your Social Security benefit is for a condition that is not your eligible condition, or if you're receiving retirement benefits from Social Security and you have a personal injury claim, those benefits are not offset from your VCF award. If you're receiving Social Security disability benefits because of your eligible condition, then those benefits will be offset from your VCF award, depending on what percentage of your disability is attributable to your eligible condition.
That's very, very helpful. Thank you very much.
Can I just say one thing to that?
I think you should explain, she's on Social Security before 9/11, so she has no economic loss. So there would be just the non-economic loss, where there would be an offset if, or not an offset.
So that's a very good point, John. So one of the things, as Jordy explained, when we're looking at whether or not someone is eligible for an economic loss award, and that is different from non-economic loss. Non-economic loss is available to everyone. All you have to do is demonstrate eligibility for our program. But when we're looking at whether or not someone qualifies for an economic loss award, what we're looking to determine is whether or not you suffer a loss of income, a loss of employment benefits, because of your 9/11 condition. If you were already out of work before 9/11 happened, or you were already out of work due to a non-9/11 related condition, that can affect whether or not you qualify for an economic loss award, because we can't attribute the loss of your income to your 9/11 condition. It's attributable to something else.
Sure. Gentlemen,
Excuse me, one
Sure.
clarification.
Follow-ups are allowed.
Thank you very much. Even though there's no loss of income, the medical problems are specific to September 11th. Does that change anything?
So, sorry, try not to knock over the candles again.
And the medical conditions are specific to the prior event for Social Security, and those medical conditions are very, very different from the things that September 11th triggered.
That's right. So even if you do not have a loss of income attributable to your 9/11 conditions, you will still qualify if you meet our eligibility requirements. You can demonstrate that you were present, you have a certified condition with the health program, you've met all of our 10 minutes deadlines, and you've waived your right to a lawsuit. You meet those conditions, you will still qualify for a non-economic loss of work, which is intended to compensate for pain and suffering associated with your 9/11 related conditions. And that non-economic pain and suffering award is the one that varies depending upon the severity of the condition that you have and the effects that that condition has on your daily life. For those of you who are members of the World Trade Center Health Program, in order to qualify for a non-economic loss or a pain and suffering award, we do not need any medical records to assess that award. Medical records can be useful if they demonstrate significant severity, but even if you don't file medical records, you'll still qualify for one of our baseline non-economic loss awards.
Sure, the gentleman in the back.
See that some of the claimants are represented by attorneys and some are not. And from the comments made by the two attorneys today as well, it seems like they have been pushing some of the cases to expedite. Is there a difference in how fast the claim is processed depending on if there's an attorney representing?
So the answer to that is no. As our process, we try to make our process available to those who are not represented. It is true that many of our claimants are represented. About 85% of our claimants are represented by attorneys, but it is not required that you be represented by an attorney in order to qualify, in order to file a claim in our program. As Stephanie talked about, we have a number of resources available, including through our helpline, to assist those of you who want to go through the process without an attorney. The expedite process that Matt spoke about, that is available to those who have terminal illnesses or those who are suffering a significant financial hardship, a foreclosure, an eviction, that is also available to people who aren't represented. All you have to do is call our helpline and explain why you believe your claim should be expedited.
Every time I call, they just tell me it's in process, and they don't give me any status whatsoever. If I say, when am I going to expect to get an answer, they say, we'll let you know. So that just doesn't add up very well. I mean, you should know how fast we're processing these claims and when you're going to get answers based on the dates and the seriousness of it. But we get no such answer. All we call it over and over. I must have called it at least 5 times. And they said, we can't provide you any information. All I can tell you is register, the claim's in, and we'll let you know. That's just not enough. You should be, based on your history, you should be able to tell me when you can see that claim.
So I appreciate the question.
No dates, never.
Dates are very difficult for us to provide because one of the incredibly unique things about the VCF is that we evaluate every claim individually. So we're looking at very unique factors. We're looking at each person's employment history, their medical history, how the conditions affect their daily life, what sorts of losses they have suffered. Because we want to provide an award that actually compensates you for the losses that you have suffered. So we're not looking at federal awards. We don't issue federal awards. We are currently processing, and I try to make statements about timing in the quarterly statements that I issue for the messages from the special master. We are currently processing claims that were fully submitted in the latter part of 2015. We're working to get through those claims so we can get to the claims that were submitted in 2016. The processing of initial claims is moving a little faster than the processing of amendments because we take the view that people who have already received a payment should be deprioritized slightly over those who have not yet received any payment from our program. and so amendments do move a little bit slower, but we are trying to catch up. We do have a backlog, but we are currently processing claims that were filed in the latter part of 2015.
Right, sure.
But that's still not an answer as to when you're gonna.
Sure,
When is your turn gonna be? I'm not asking you how long it's gonna take you to process the claim. It's just when are you gonna look at the claim?
Do you have an attorney?
No.
All right, so check this out. I know this bill better than most attorneys, and I got an attorney. So by doing this yourself, and no offense to anybody trying to do this for yourself, and while they're saying it's not faster or slower, your life is easier when you have an attorney. You don't have to deal with the paperwork, you don't have to deal with
John,
that.
I have to disagree with
Right.
that. We can process the claims.
No,
First thing first.
I'm not saying,
It's
I'm not
based
saying
on the-
whether,
it's based on the date.
what I'm saying is,
It doesn't matter whether it's right.
I'm saying when you have an attorney, your life becomes easier. That's why we have attorneys.
Sure, let me just speak to you, Sarah. Your first question for me, not representing anyone, but I am an attorney, so don't hold that against me, is, and I think they're both saying the same things here. If you have, my personal recommendation to people when they ask, do I need an attorney, I say, if you have a complicated case, if you have many issues like disabilities, I would recommend an attorney. If you have a simple case, and again, the question's complicated, you may not need an attorney, but they don't respond, the VCF does not respond differently whether you have an attorney or you don't. They treat everyone the same. The reason why, if you have a complicated case, I would recommend an attorney is they do this all the time, and they know what the process goes faster if you have the paperwork done in the way and answer the questions. If you're unfamiliar with it, you may not, again, not knowing your case, not knowing the specifics of your case, I can't speak to that. I'm glad to talk to you afterwards about it. So I just want to be clear, whether you have an attorney or not, they're going to treat them the same. If you have a complicated case, I think it helps you to have an attorney, and it's worth it to you, even the expense, because they'll make sure it's in their interest to make sure that you get as much compensation as possible, and they do it repetitively. That's the only thing that I would say, because I think they're both saying the same thing. So let me get another question. I'm happy to talk to you afterwards about your case. This lady here, please.
I'm a member of the World Trade Center health plan. And how do I get most of it is covered by my insurance, but I always have like 150, 200 left over when I get a bill from the doctor. How do I get that paid?
I'm not sure I understand. Are you in the health program?
Yes.
So are you in the survivor program or the responder program?
Survivor.
So you should not be getting billed for anything if you're in the survivor program.
I get bills all the time.
Sure.
I get prostate.
Then again, I'm going to add you to the list. Let me talk to you afterwards. You should not be getting bills directly. So just so we understand that that's not for the compensation program, but the survivor program, as a survivor, you should not get any bills, but your insurance company does get third-party
My
payments.
insurance company pays like 90%.
Sure. Let me talk to you later and finish this conversation. The lady behind, please.
I just wanted to find out what the timing is between the pain and suffering payment and the economic loss payment. Are they all going to come at the same time?
That's a good
Or are
question.
they going to come, the one that's more regular, it's more universal, that come early?
So that's a very good question. So we have, we're really making an effort not to do what we call bifurcating claims. We want to issue one payment at the same time, both because I think it's better for the claimants, but also because it's much more efficient for us not to have to pick up the same claim multiple times to assess it for different kinds of loss. So we try not to bifurcate the claims, and we try to issue the kind of all of the kinds of loss that are requested at the same time. But that means that the more complicated claims that have more documents, more offsets, more things that require us to actually evaluate individually to take a little bit longer to process.
Follow-up? Sure. Are you working with our president, particularly in Manhattan as well? She's someone who would be very interested in having you come to the borough board meeting and
right there and a great ending. I think Rupert and Michael will, in fact, everyone here would be happy to come speak at organizations, speak at opportunities, to talk to people, to explain this. We're running out of time. I know that,
Yes, well, okay.
sure.
Okay, yes, since 2003, when I was pulled out, right, not only was I supposed to be on Red Cross and FEMA, but because of delays of the VCF funds, actually getting medical, testing, I did not get my trust-marked disability insurance. I lost my house from the Office of Teachers program, and also the Essex, for the past 15 years, all right, I'm on two registries, the National Registry and the local registry. The National Registry, and because I'm still in the city, the Essex Decree 98A just passed a month ago, okay? And why aren't these registries mailing the persons that signs up for it and telling them their rights and benefits? What's happening with snail mail, and why they not, that's how you be able, people be able to know.
Sure, that's not really for the VCF. Again, I'm happy to talk to you afterwards to try to address your concerns, man. So I think Mary's giving us the boot, so thank everyone.
Thank you all.
I just wanted to mention that we're going to be having lunch now. We're going to reconvene at 1:30. We have Alice Greenwald from the 9/11 Museum, Sue Frost, who's a producer of Come From Away, Allison Gilbert, who wrote a book on commemoration, myself. And then following that, we're going to have peer-to-peer facilitated conversations at each of the tables. And so we'll have some of the clinicians facilitating conversations. We know that we have a very tight schedule and a lot of information that we're sharing today. And we want to have the opportunity at the end of the day to be able to talk with one another. So if you don't have a voucher for lunch, again, I want to thank all of the sponsors of the lunch today for their generosity. But stop at the registration desk. And then for those of you who are interested, we're going to be proceeding down to the 9/11 Memorial at the end conclusion of the program today. So thanks very much, and we'll see you after lunch.